Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thank you very much for joining me. Today, I'm going to be giving you a quick review of Stellar Blade. Now, the reason I decided to review Stellar Blade is that going into this game, I didn't really foresee that I would like it as much as I did. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't go in with low expectations or anything like that, but I did not anticipate that I would enjoy it as much as I did. And one quick question that you can ask yourself to sort of gauge if you may or may not like it as much as I did I play Nier Automata and did I enjoy it? Now, if you answered yes to both of these questions, then there's a high probability that you'll like Stellar Blade as well, because it's clearly influenced by Nier Automata. Its combat is very similar, its music is very similar, the environments are very similar. They both have this ultra feminine character design, and even the story here in Stellar Blade is highly reminiscent of the one back in Nier Automata. But there is one big difference between the two games, at least for me anyway, and that is that Stellar Blade does most, if not all of these things, better than Nier Automata and is a superior game. Now, don't worry, for those of you who didn't play Nier Automata, this review is not going to be me comparing the two games and seeing which one did certain aspects better than the other. I am going to be attempting to review Stellar Blade in its own right, so let's get on with it. Okay, so I'll start with the game's combat because it really is the best part of the game, and I don't just mean that from a relative standpoint in comparison to everything else in it, because Stellar Blade's combat really is excellent. That being said, though, for fans who are already familiar with this style of game, there's not going to be a lot new here for you, but it does execute what it does really well. Stellar Blade by no means reinvents the wheel, but it does put a sexy woman with a big sword that doubles as a hair clip on top of it and goes, have some of that. You'll be doing heavy and light attacks, you'll be parrying and dodging, you'll be combating certain enemies that have color-coded attacks which can only be dodged. Then you'll be using those aforementioned mechanics to fill a meter, which you can utilize on special attacks. It's very, very fast-paced, it's super stylish and incredibly fun, and also manages to be complex without being overly convoluted. Okay, so just to further elaborate a few more points on why I enjoyed the combat so much in this game, one reason is that Stellar Blade does a better job than other games of this type, certainly in my experience anyway, of finding a nice middle ground when it comes to the timing windows of the dodges and the parries. It's not too lenient, it's not too tight, so they're not impossible to pull off, but they're always satisfying to do so. And this is important because this is integral to the moment-to-moment gameplay, because all the combos that you unlock are linked to being able to pull them off, and this helps give the enemies just that right amount of challenge. And when it comes to enemies in this game, the boss fights deserve special mention because Stellar Blade has some absolutely killer boss fights in it. Stellar Blade also has one of the better implementations of a lock-on in a melee combat-based game, certainly out of the ones that I've encountered. Anyway, I've played other games of this type, and sometimes the lock-on can give up way too easily. That's not a problem here in Stellar Blade. It always works really efficiently, and I didn't have any problems at all with the lock-on throughout the entire duration of my playthrough. Okay, so as much as I enjoyed the combat here in Stellar Blade, it's not perfect by any means. Saying that, though, the issues that I did have with it closely resembled nitpicks rather than outright criticisms, and one of those was the amount of times I got cheap shot in the back from off-screen by an enemy who was hidden round a corner and in my blind side. And when I say this, I'm not talking about some unlucky RNG aspect with an enemy just ending up in an unlucky position. They are meant to be there, and they are meant to cheap shot you, because when you load back into a game after dying or turning off your console and then loading back on again, they're in the same spots and they act the same way. And I lost count of how many times this happened to me, and it's very, very annoying. So another small nitpick that I had was how the special attacks in this game felt mostly redundant. Now, these are the same special attacks which I made quick reference to earlier. It'll be very familiar to fans of this style of game. You fill up a meter using basic attacks, parries, dodges, that sort of thing. Then you can utilize this meter on unleashing special attacks, and you have different special attacks assigned to different buttons. But if I'm being honest with you, throughout my playthrough anyway, I just ended up doing the special attack assigned to the square button because that's where my thumb was lingering, because it's the same button as the basic attacks. Because outside of a different animation, these all seem to do the same thing, and the net results seem to be the same. Because the combat here in Stellar Blade has no elemental aspect to it like in other games of this type. So, for example, you won't find yourself in a scenario where you battle a fire-based enemy and you have to use an ice-based attack on them. There's nothing like that here. That being said, though, I did play through on standard, so these special attacks may be more pertinent, on the high difficulties, but if you're like me and played through on the standard difficulty, they felt mostly pointless. Stellar Blade also struggles to fully incorporate its third-person shoot mechanics into the moment-to-moment gameplay. Now, when I say third-person shooting, I don't mean the sort of auto-aim shooting like you'd find in Devil May Cry or something like that, nor do I mean aiming from the camera like you would do in Nier Automata. Stellar Blade has a fully manual over-the-shoulder third-person shooting system, similar to one that you find in Resident Evil 4. Now, yes, when I say over-the-shoulder, I do use that term loosely here because Eve's shooting animation is a little more seductive than Leon's. Anyway, while yes, this shooting is quite fun and punchy to use, outside of a couple of very Dead Space-like missions, which are actually quite fun to be honest, and a couple of late-game boss counters, you're never really required to use it. Throughout my playthrough, I completed the enemy manifest, so I encountered every enemy that this game has to offer, and you can kill everything with the sword, and you have to willingly incorporate this shooting into your playstyle, or it just sits there idly. I also wasn't much of a fan of how Stellar Blade ignores your perfect dodges and parries. Now, what do I mean by that? Let me give you an example. You'll be in an encounter with an enemy and they'll go for a 3-hit combo. You pull off a perfect dodge or parry on that first hit, but if you try to follow up with an attack, you'll just get hit by that second hit in your enemy's combination. And like I said earlier, the timing windows here for the dodges and parries are not overly generous, and you take a shit ton of damage. Now, yes, this wasn't much of an issue for the majority of the game, but as you start to move into late game and fight some of the later bosses, this became more amplified because it felt like I was having to pull off 1,000 dodges and parries to get one hit in, and at this point in the game, you do minimal damage. Even some of the boss's finishing moves don't allow you and don't give you a window of opportunity to follow up with an attack, which made some of the bosses towards the end of the game feel really frustrating and really protracted. Okay, so moving on from the combat now, what else does Stellar Blade have to offer from a gameplay perspective? Well, the game has you doing quite a fair chunk of platforming, which is unfortunate because the platforming here in Stellar Blade is some of the single worst platforming I've ever encountered in a third-person video game. For starters, Eve's movements have far too much inertia applied to them, and while yes, this makes perfect sense from a physics standpoint, Stellar Blade's locations really aren't set in reality, and when you try to jump onto some of these small platforms that the game requires you to, your momentum will simply carry you over the edge. I lost count of how many times I fell into a void in this game during the platforming sections. Also, trying to get Eve to grab onto ledges can be an absolute nightmare at times, and the platforming here is absolutely awful. Now, fortunately, there's not quite enough of it here to make you rage quit the game, but there is just enough of it to make you realise how terrible it is. Stellar Blade also has some open world elements to it, albeit on a much more smaller scale in comparison to other modern day open world games, and this for me was 100% the right direction to go in, because Stellar Blade's chosen locations simply aren't conducive to a vast open world, because they are inherently filled with big empty spaces, and downsizing the open world this way allows it to maintain the authenticity of its chosen locations without making it too tedious to traverse through and interact with. It's not just the environments here in Stellar Blade that benefit from this downscaling, but its open world content does as well. Now for me, side content in open world games is going to be judged by how good a job it does of masquerading as something actually substantial and not the filler content that it is. And in this regard, Stellar Blade does an okay job. Most of the side missions here boil down to go to point A, kill or find something, then return to the person who gave you the mission in the first place. It's not terrible by any means, but it's certainly been done better by other games. Okay, so just one final thought on the gameplay here in Stellar Blade, and that is this game does a better job of pacing its main story missions, at least from a gameplay perspective anyway, than other modern day AAA games, which have a tendency to drag out certain sections far too long. Yes, I'm looking at you, Final Fantasy Rebirth. One example I'll give you is during one of the story missions, the game tasked me with what essentially was a physicsy based puzzle. Now this puzzle was okay, but it wasn't the most exciting thing ever. Anyway, I finished the puzzle, I opened the door, and as I'm going through to the next room, I fully expect the game to turn around and go, well, I hope you enjoyed that puzzle, because now you're going to have to do it again. I didn't, and this left a much better impression of this section, which could have turned out to be really tedious and I've been forced to repeat this puzzle. And for me, this was a microcosm of the main story missions, which seem to move more briskly than in other games. Now, don't get me wrong, Stellar Blade isn't totally averse to the go pull 3 switches, go find 3 things, but even here, it just seems to not outstay its welcome like it does in other games. Okie dokie, so at the risk of really rubbing certain people the wrong way, I totally adored the character design in this game, and yes, I'm ostensibly talking about main character Eve. I know, I'm just an abhorrent evil man, I guess. What I didn't like, though, is how this game turned me into a total diva, especially towards the end of my playthrough, once I'd unlocked several different outfits, because I must have spent at least an hour minimum in the inventory screen changing Eve's clothes because I didn't know which outfit to wear, because there are so many cool outfits in this game. Unfortunately, Eve is a mostly vapid character which simply doesn't have the personality to back up a super cool character design, and if for a moment we compare Eve to Lady Dimitrescu from Resident Evil 8, who was someone that piqued fan interest pre-release with a stunning character design, but at the end of the day it was her electric personality and charisma which made her such a memorable character. Eve has none of these things though. We don't get any backstory on it. She doesn't even have any Bayonetta style sass, nothing to create any interest in her, and it probably won't be too long after you finish with Stellar Blade that you'll have forgotten all about Eve. Eve's supporting cast aren't much better, unfortunately, but to be fair to the game, it does try to inject some personality with the introduction of a character named Lily, who you meet relatively early on in the game. And while she's probably the best character in the game, to be honest, it still falls a little flat, and the characters overall are a total disappointment. So in line with the characters, the story here in Stellar Blade is not up to much either, unfortunately. Now, when it comes to story in a no-spoiler review, it's hard to know how to play it. I want to elaborate on things a little bit, but I want to be vague at the same time so I don't spoil events for players who haven't played it yet. So anyway, just to go along with my general indifference of the story here, I actually found that the events leading up to Stellar Blade would have made for a far more intriguing story than the one we actually get. And then just to compound this, Stellar Blade's narrative far too often boils down to a fetch quest, and I expected a lot more from the story here, which is mostly disappointing. Okay, I think that about wraps up everything I wanted to cover in the review. I did try to keep the background footage as derivative and as spoiler-free as possible, even though it highlights just how truly terrible I was at this game. Trust me, it gets no better than what you've seen playing along in the background. I was awful at this game. Anyway, conclusion. Stellar Blade is a game that does one thing really well. That's its combat. It's a lot of fun. But unfortunately, other aspects of the game aren't quite as good. Its characters are disappointing. Its story is underwhelming. And while its open world is decent, you certainly don't want more of it. So, is Stellar Blade a good game? Yeah, it is. I had a lot of fun with it. Is Stellar Blade a great game? I'm not so sure. I'll leave it there. I hope you had fun watching the video. I hope it was useful to you, and I'll catch you next time.